This week on Dig Me Out,
the winner of our December 2013 iTunes feedback is
Tim and Jay review Nuclear Sounds by Ash.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Dig Me Out. I forgot what I say here. Oh yeah, I'm your host Tim Minichi, and joining me once again, my co-host Mr. Jason Ziak. Jay actually did blank there for a minute on what I was supposed to do, but then it came rushing back.
Isn't that funny? Like, you've said that how many times now? 150 something?
160. This is episode 160 of our fourth season. And yeah, I actually forgot it after doing it 159 times in a row.
It was like today I was out tying some boxes, like packing boxes and trying to bundle them up. And I had twine and I'm tie the first one up and I'm good to go. And I get to the second one and I couldn't remember how to tie a knot. Like I couldn't figure out how I did it on the first one to make it work. And and all of a sudden I'm just sitting there like, am I like having a stroke or something? Like, how do you forget how to tie a knot?
I think that's called middle age, Jay, which we were both approaching this year.
I just totally blanked, so I know where you're coming from.
Yeah. That's it's a scary thing when that starts happening. But you know what's not scary, Jay, is us reviewing an album from the 90s, which we do every week. And this season we started out picking out some of our, I guess you'd say, bands that we had been talking about, familiar with, but hadn't reviewed them yet. Bands like the Helicopters and Catherine Wheel and some other artists. I brought in a band to the table that I'm actually not familiar with. This was a band that I always heard their name. They were mentioned with a lot of other artists as being similar, but I just never got into them and didn't know a lot of people that were into them, at least here in the United States. And I'm speaking of Ash. The UK, I guess we're lumped in with Britpop, but we'll get into that later, whether or not they're actually Britpop. But they were from actually Northern Ireland, and they were one of those bands like constantly mentioned in like the NME, Melody Maker, lumped in with Supergrass and a bunch of other bands from the sort of mid to late 90s. They're following the Oasis and Blur Britpop explosion and with Pulp and Suede and those sorts of bands, and they sort of were with the second wave, I guess you'd say. Jay, your familiarity with Ash?
Yeah, I think I was like you. I heard the name a lot. For some reason, the album covers are very familiar to me. So I saw the album covers a lot. I think I had, let's see here, the record I had for some reason was Free All Angels.
Okay.
That's the one that's most familiar to me. I didn't listen to it a ton, but for some reason I remember that one, and I believe I had that record. And that was later. I mean, that's 2001 record, but
correct.
Yeah, they were sort of always there. I generally knew what they sounded like, but that's about it.
So let's get into the history of Ash.
History of the band.
Ash formed in Downpatrick, Northern Ireland in 1992 by vocalist and guitarist Tim Wheeler, bassist Mark Hamilton, and drummer Rick McMurray. They released the mini album Trailer in 1994 and then followed up with their first full-length album 1977 in 1996. They recruited Charlotte Hatherley as guitarist and vocalist and released their second full-length album Nuclear Sounds in 1998, which is the album that we are reviewing, the difficult sophomore follow-up album. So Nuclear Sounds was both a critical and commercial disappointment for the band, so much so that they almost went into bankruptcy as a band. They regrouped and released the album, which you mentioned, Free All Angels, in 2001, which had a number of successful singles in the UK. Their fourth record, Meltdown, was released in 2004, and that was the band's final record with Charlotte Hatherley. They went back to being a three-piece and released their fifth studio album, Twilight of the Innocents, in 2007. So at that point, they said no more albums, and from in 2009, they started releasing singles only, and they released 26 singles, one new single every 2 weeks. They call it the A to Z series. But there is a new album in the works, Jay, and supposedly that will be out this year. So they went back on their no more albums, which I've heard other bands do that too. The Cult did that.
Yeah. I think we talked about that. I think the in theory it sounds great until you try to break down the financials of doing that, and it just doesn't make any sense. Like you just can't. There's no business right now. There's no business case to be made for doing that.
No, it's just
unfortunately.
It's an interesting concept, and I like.
I mean, it worked I'm sure it worked fine in the 50s and 60s when there was radio. There was only one channel to hear music. It was the AM radio. But now that there's so many channels, you really need to. It just works better to do a record so that you can put promotion behind it
and tour behind it. You can go do a big album or big tour. And I did want to mention that corresponding with this podcast, Ash is actually in the United States recording their album, and they're doing not a huge tour, but a couple of weeks of touring throughout the United States. So if you are an Ash fan, now is the time to go see them because they're touring in January and February in the U.S. So we did get some feedback. We got feedback both on Facebook and in our Dig Me Out podcast.com page, which you can visit to, request an album for us to review. Over at digmeoutpodcast.com, Stephen Frazier said, Nuclear Sound is good, but not as good as, or is as good as their Britpop grunge crossover 1986 album 1977. So he said it fares comparable to their debut album. And then over on Facebook, we got some feedback. Gavin Reed, okay, just put in this car now. I remember Ash fondly, saw them twice, and like everyone else, had a crush on the chick bass player. I think this is fairly late though, and I might have moved on, so I'll comment further after listening, but great choice. And then he did actually listen and said, having listened to this, sounds like a band that had decided to change their sound without deciding what the sound should be. They don't even try to hide the opening of the album with a Nirvana riff. If I was good enough to DJ, I feel like I could recreate this album from other albums in my collection. And yet, when I got to the end of it, I played it again, so I guess I liked it. That's an interesting comment, and we'll talk about a collection of other albums that makes up this album. Dimitri, the supposed sophomore slump for Ash. It sure is forgettable, but their first album was really, really flawed to me already. To be honest, I didn't understand all the fuss about Ash back then. But Girl from Mars is great, especially Goldfinger is probably the most beautiful song they ever did. What a melody. Anyway, back to Nuclear. I don't remember much except for Numbskull, Well, and Projects, which I love. John Michael Foster, dig this record. And Eric Grubbs, such a misunderstood record. When it was originally released, many acts from across the pond make darker and heavier records during this time, i.e. Blur and Pulp. And this was a bit of a bigger step away from their past than regular Ash fans had wanted. So many great songs on here, like Folk Song, Projects, and Wild Surf, the second mention of Projects. Jay, that's a good segue into the album, and the first track on the record is Projects. That's for sure. Dark in heaven, baby, that's for sure. Same voice and the stand beat my ears. Jealousy's hopes and fears. The voice is deepening. Started seas, midnight keeps beneath cool sheets. The surf sighs and seas, the feet dream to sleep. Dark in heaven, baby, that's for sure. Dark in heaven, baby, that's for sure. Gavin Reed said it sounds very Nirvana-esque, like they're almost, ripping a Nirvana riff. It does. It has a Nirvana-esque feel to it. Very big, heavy, distorted guitar in the Bleach sort of vein. Has a grungy feel that a lot of this record has an Americanized alternative feel to it, more so than any sort of a Britpop feel going back and listening to this, well, not going back actually, I mean discovering this for the first time, I guess, I was surprised at how Americanized this sound. Did you feel the same way?
Well, not really. Now that you say it, I guess I'm not going to say it, there aren't American influences here or pieces and parts, but wasn't the first thing I thought of. This song reminded me a lot of Swerve Driver, honestly. It wasn't just the riff. Yeah, there's a riff there that I guess you could say it's Nirvana or tons of other bands. It's a really good riff, underneath the song, and it's kind of got a cool like offbeat rhythm, but there's this other element of another guitar and keyboards or something. I don't know what's going on. There's this other secondary set of noises and chords and things accompanying the main riff that make me think more of something like a Swerve Driver, where it's like it kind of gets into a swirling, almost chaotic at times, full-on assault of intertwined riffs and bends and chirping sounds and washes of guitar. That kind of threw me for this band, because I remember them being, the sound I would hear in my head would be a little bit more cleaner, straightforward, alternative rock, pretty crisp and sharp. And this seems a lot more experimental, at least for the first track.
Huh, really? I guess I thought of Swerve Driver as being a little more groove oriented, and this seems to be just sort of a bit more in like that like Nirvana like stomp, and like everything is sort of built around the guitar riff, where in Swerve Driver I think a lot of it being built around like the rhythm section and the bass especially. But that's an interesting approach towards it. Now they make a big shift with the second track, Low Ebb, and this is where I think one of the biggest influences I heard on this record is, or I would say influences, because I don't know if it was. I know that they were into a lot of American bands from reading and stuff like that. But one of the ones that I hear, especially in his vocal, is Weezer, and this is where it starts to sound a lot like Weezer to me, especially the second album, Pinkerton, where they let things fly a little bit more. But they also they have some real delicate moments on Pinkerton, and this song sort of heads into that direction. There's a nice use of a cello on this record, on this song. Not overstated. It's just sort of mixed in there with it's kind of simple. It's not in the forefront. It's where I kind of went, okay, this is a little bit derivative. And I was when I got to track 2, I was like, all right, when is this band gonna actually start sounding like a band that's got some original ideas rather than sounding like other bands that are current, or from the recent past for this when this was released. I don't know. Did you feel that same? Did you feel?
Well, I think this record is held together by, for better or worse, the production. So there's a lot of material in here. I think at first couple of listens, sounds cohesive. But as we reviewed it and break it down, and you actually listen to the songwriting that's going on and not the production as much, I think that's where the derivative aspects start to come out. This one, yeah, I thought at least the intro part, where it's sort of this big lumbering riff that breaks down kind of into a ballad, like you said, with the cello, the strings kind of mixed in there, and has a very chimey guitar, almost sounds like a piano at times. But it kind of started off for me in a Dinosaur Jr. or even like a Pavement-y kind of place, and then it evolves into more of an alt rock ballad by the time you get to the deep into the verse and into the chorus. I don't know that it's completely derivative yet for me on track 2, but you can definitely hear, I guess, to your earlier point, it's starting to make sense to me what you heard in terms of the American influences, it seemed to be there was a little bit of a movement, wasn't there? Blur sort of had a response to American grunge with song 2. And
yeah, they definitely on their self-titled record, and then the follow-up 13, they definitely have like an Americanized, approach to some of the songwriting with like what you mentioned with like song 2.
And we talked about Craft and Wheels, Happy Days. There was an element of that with them. That seemed to be a thing that UK bands did on their second or third record around this time.
Absolutely. Now, one of the tracks that I think is, I guess, unique to the band is the third track, Jesus Says, which if you had told me that this was like an early Black Rebel Motorcycle Club song, I would have believed you, because this has all the elements of that band.
Yeah.
Of that, like, sort of, it has like almost a New York Dollsy glam rockish sort of 70s feel to it, but very distinctly 1990s approach to the production and the guitar tone and everything.
A louder Dandy Warhols.
Yes, loud Dandy Warhols. Perfect comparison there. To me, it's tracks 3 and 4 are to me the high points of the record. Track 4 is Wild Surf. That sounds totally like a Weezer song.
Yes.
But in the same way that Weezer was like taking like the Beach Boys and Nirvana and sort of turning them into their unique sound, that's what this song has. It has that like sunny disposition, but with a lot of energy and angst behind it.
Early 60s pop, right? I mean, and even Super Drag, the Super Drag record we just reviewed had a lot of the same elements in terms of the melodies and the approach to songwriting.
What's so funny about it is that they have this great run of Jesus Says and Wild Surf, and then follow it up with quite possibly one of the worst songs we've ever encountered on this podcast, which is Death Trip 21, in which they try to apparently write a Prodigy song. I don't know what is going on with that track.
Yeah.
It is so awful.
Yeah, it's got the turntable in it, right?
It's not the only appearance of the turntable on this record.
True. And I don't know, how would you describe the drums? They're not slappy, but they're definitely like kind of fast and trippy dance oriented.
Yeah,
although if you dance to this, you'd be like doing a total freak out. But I could kind of picture in my head somebody doing it.
It sounds like, you know how like Noel Gallagher appears on like a Chemical Brothers song in the 90s. I think it was Setting Sun. Like, it sounds like the Prodigy and Ash like collaborated on a track.
Yeah.
Like there's just no reason for this song to be on this record. It sounds so out of place between Wild Surf and folk song.
Yeah, the sequencing in this record is kind of awful too.
Yes.
We haven't gotten into that, but like Low Ebb I felt was a terrible song to have second. This song is maybe could have worked as like the last song on the record, but in the middle it's weird. I mean, I will say that, like I said before, better or worse, the at least the production's consistent. So this song is like, even though it's dance or electronic influenced or something, they are still playing with the same instruments that they do on the other songs, with the same sounds they do on the other songs. So it's not like all of a sudden they like use drum machines and keyboards. It could almost work, I think, if it was sequenced correctly and maybe just a little less of the turntable crap.
Yeah.
And I think to just touch on the production again, I know I'm the one in the show that gets overly nerdy about this stuff, but this record's a little difficult on the ears, especially on headphones. It's got a lot of cymbals. It's got a lot of like high mid range stuff going on. That's just like it's not at all. It's not very pleasant cranked in your headphones. Let's put it that way.
It causes some fatigue on the ears.
Yes, and this song's a good example of that. It's just there's just nonstop tambourine and cymbals, just through the whole song. It's a lot to take.
Mm-hmm. It's why nobody wants to listen to the Prodigy anymore. It's for the same reason. It's fatigue. And then they follow that up with a really pretty song, with folk song. Really nice use of the guitar and vocal playing off of each other. There's a picking that sometimes matches the vocal and then sometimes plays off of it, which is really cool. There's a lot of ballads on this record, a lot of slow stuff. This is by far the best of all of them, and I think this was a single. I'm not sure. I'd have to double check, but I can definitely see it being successful as a single track, as opposed to some of the other ones that I don't think work as well.
It gets near a Travis kind of sound. So both vocally and from a melodic standpoint, I really like the way that the guitars are orchestrated in the song. There's a nice mix of electric and acoustic, and really nice chimey lead, and there's some synth sounds mixed in, but they're not like so overt, and gets a little like psychedelic towards the bridge. It's a little weird, but I guess there's some variety there. But I think this, in terms of the slow songs on the record, this is the most successful for sure.
I think why it's successful is that it's very melodic without being really hooky, if that's possible. Like, a lot of times you feel like the verses are sort of there simply to get to the chorus, and I feel like he does a really good job with the melody in the verses, like I mentioned, with that guitar interplay playing off of that, but it doesn't necessarily have a massive chorus the way a lot of some of these other songs do. Track 7, Numbskull, suffers, I think, from the same dated ideas as Death Trip 21 does. It also has just this horribly repetitive guitar vocal riff that goes on throughout the verses. Just this like start and stop that they don't do a lot with. It just and then they do the start and the stop, and then sometimes they'll have like a guitar picking in between, but then sometimes they have like a keyboard scratch.
Yep.
Or a not keyboard scratch, but a turntable scratch. Awful. Just a terrible idea.
And I like the sound of the riff. It comes in, you're like, oh, it sounds big, and it's all big fuzzy bass. And I was really hoping it was going somewhere, and it doesn't go anywhere. I mean, that's the song, and it would have been a great intro, and then evolves into something else, but that didn't happen. So it's kind of like a jam over a really simple riff. They just it's 3 minutes of them trying to like make something out of this riff that would just kind of kill it.
What needed to happen was that needed to be like the intro to the song, and then what is the chorus of the song should have been the verse, and they should have written a better chorus for the song.
Yeah.
Because the chorus is fine, it's nothing special, but it would have sufficed as a decent verse.
Mm-hmm. They play off the rip just a little bit to kind of create another part, which would have been great for a verse, except they use it as their chorus. And it's kind of a letdown.
It's definitely a letdown. Because you think there's something awesome coming, but then they just murder it. Yeah. Track 8, Burnout. This back-to-back with Aphrodite, two of the more restrained songs. Burnout is fine. I was annoyed by Aphrodite. Very simplistic. It sounded like this band like tossed it off in like 5 minutes. Like, it sounds like a billion other sort of simple ballads that harken back to like the 1950s. I mean, it has nothing distinct about it. It just sounds like something you could write on a guitar in like a half hour. And it seems like this album goes from like one really good song to one crap song to one good song to one crap song. And this is where I was getting annoyed by the back half, after Numbskull, and then I was like, okay, Burnout's okay, and then Aphrodite, I was like, ugh, and it was just like this pattern that it was emerging.
Yeah, he doesn't possess a voice where in these slow songs you can, let the verse carry on his vocal. It's just, he needs a melody, and both these songs, that's more difficult to do in a slower tempo, in a quiet song. I think Aphrodite actually has a pretty, like, when they switch to the chorus, he gets a lot more expressive, and it takes a little turn that's kind of nice. It's just the verses are brutal. And I think the other thing about these two songs, I think they're trying to be kind of sweet, and they ended up just kind of sounding disaffected, like distant and lazy, not sweet. So from that standpoint, they don't work for me. No.
Track 10 does work for me, though. Very, very much in the vein of like the Stooges' Raw Power era. Just this propulsive, up-tempo, heavy, fuzzed out guitar rock sort of, stuff going on, and not necessarily the most complex thing, but it works as a single, as a sort of self-contained track that's buried amongst a lot of crap at the end of the record.
Well, yeah, I think you could take the first, four songs, and you've got some material that goes together. I think production-wise, it falls in line with the first track. Well, all of them, like I've said, but those four songs would hold together from a songwriting standpoint enough. The guitars are so fuzzed out on this song, it's crazy, and there's so much reverb on the drums. It's kind of a cool sound, and I think it works for some material better than others. I think it works for this song. They kind of get into a space where you kind of get that 60s pop songwriting feel. It almost verges on Oasis. It gets close to Britpop. It's just such a different production style because the guitars are just so fuzzed out. It can be, I could see for most people they wouldn't necessarily make that connection, but from a songwriting standpoint,
right,
if you like broke down what they're playing there and you played it on a less abrasive tones, I think you would hear a lot more of an Oasis-y kind of Britpop song underneath the facade of this tune.
Then the closing track, I'm Gonna Fall, is another one of the quieter moments on the record. You mentioned Travis earlier. This could easily be another Travis-esque song. It feels like this record is almost like three different records. It's this bombastic, in-your-face, ultra heavily distorted, fuzzed out, Stooges, almost like stoner rock heavy influenced, record, and then it's this very delicate and light, quiet, ballady record with like these two ridiculous turntable prodigy, whatever the hell songs kind of mixed in there. I get why there were a lot of people who were turned off, both fans and then also reviewers, by this record, because it almost needed to be released like 3 different EPs to make sense, because I think as a record it just doesn't make sense. And you mentioned earlier about the sequencing. The sequencing is awful on this record. They build up momentum and then kill it immediately with the only time when the record makes sense is when they go from 3 to 4, when they go from Jesus Says to Wild Surf. They keep the momentum going, but after that, it's just like you said, from 1 to 2, anybody who puts the mellow song second, you better write a really, really good mellow song.
Yeah, it better be single worthy.
Right.
Yeah, the last tune is just, it sounds like them trying to write Sunday Morning.
Yeah.
Without the melody. So this Burnout, Aphrodite, I don't get where they're going with those tunes. They, especially with the fact that they're all lumped at the end of the record. It all seems kind of random. I wonder how much material they wrote for this record too, and it kind of feels like maybe they only wrote 11 or 12 songs, and they didn't have a lot to work with. And they just kind of put in whatever they had, because there's definitely not a lot of thought here. It doesn't seem, or at least I don't get it, what the thought is on the sequencing and the overall direction on the songwriting.
And here's the question I have about this record. So at any point, was it apparent that they had brought in a whole nother guitar player and a female to sing? Because this sounds like a 3-piece that they just did overdubs in the studio. Like, I don't get that, her contributions, and I know that she sings more on Free All Angels and Meltdown, and I haven't listened to those records intently enough to know whether or not the guitar playing is if it's in the same vein as this or not. But to me, there doesn't seem to be a lot going on from a 2-guitar approach. In the same way that you say, we just did the Helicopters album. There's clearly a very distinct approach going on with that record when it comes to utilizing 2 guitars, where in this album, it's almost like she's not there. Like, I don't necessarily get any big contribution from her. It's
not as much as it could have been. I think part of that is mixing. I feel like this album is mixed very poorly. It's not like, it's very narrow. When you listen to it in headphones, like, everything's kind of feels like in the middle. It's not like, which makes it difficult. If you just take the first track, for example, I sort of started talking about like there's like another guitar there and it's doing things and there's other sounds, but the way that it's mixed, it makes it very difficult to decipher what's going on. It's not separated enough. And I think it definitely sounds a lot more complex than, just quickly sampling the record before this, from a layering standpoint of guitars. But I think the mix doesn't quite help you decipher that there's another person there and they have their own space. It's kind of like the main riff, and then there's this other wash of other things going on that all just kind of blends together.
So, go ahead.
It's difficult to tell that second guitar from all the other shit that they use, like the keyboard and the turntable and the cello and the whatever else. Like, all of that stuff blends together.
Yes. So, Jay, let's get to a rating on this record. Worthy album, better EP, decent single. Where are you at?
I would be at an EP. I would love for it to be remixed. I think there is some cool stuff here. And I could see myself being in the mood to listen to, the first 4 tracks and probably Fortune Teller. But I couldn't be at an album.
No, me neither. I would swap Folk Song for Low Ebb, but I would basically go with the same tracks as you. I think there's too many glaring weaknesses on the ballads and the 2 bad attempts at Prodigy songs are well, not 2. Death Trip 21 is really the Prodigy song, and then Numbskull is just a dumb song. But at 5 songs, I think that they'd have a solid EP. So no, this was not a case where people misread this album when it came out and it didn't get positive reviews or positive response from the fans because it was underappreciated. I think this is probably a bit of a disappointing record for anybody who hears it, because the songwriting is just not there. That's what it comes down to on a lot of these songs. So
Is this pretty typical though of this band? I mean, not this exact record, but that general problem, like just not knowing who they are completely on a record, like because that's how I kind of remember that record I mentioned. It was just inconsistent, and I'm kind of wandering in terms of the songwriting.
Yeah, I'm not familiar enough with the rest of their catalog to be able to say. I've given everything a cursory, sort of listen once through, but I don't know well enough if to say that's definitely the case. This band is, from just listening to their singles, has always struck me as like being a little bit derivative of bigger bands like Weezer, like Nirvana, like those sorts of artists, and sort of a lot of bands are derivative of other bands, but they're able to put such a unique spin on it that you don't necessarily mind it. We mentioned Black Rebel Road, or I mentioned Black Rebel Motorcycle Club in mentioning Jesus Says. Black Rebel Motorcycle Club sounds like a lot of other bands, but they're able to put a kind of a unique spin on it, and it doesn't necessarily bother me as much with them. But with this album and with this band, their weaknesses, I think, are a bit more glaring than some other artists. So,
yes,
there you go. Yes. So, if you are one of those people that think that Nuclear Sounds is actually a worthy album, chime in. Tell us we're wrong. Tell us that Death Trip 21 is the best song that you've heard in a long time. If you do, we will have you committed to an insane asylum. But we'll give your opinion a listen anyways. You can do so by leaving us feedback over at Facebook and our digmeoutpodcast.com page, where you can always find our updates on the, during the week, and request reviews for us to listen to and check in or check out down the road. We've already got quite a few requests coming in, and we'll be starting on those very soon. Lots of good stuff for us to listen to, Jay, this year, thanks to our very supportive fan base. Now, I do want to mention we had previously talked about, our December contest, where we said we're going to pick one person who left comments during the month of December 2013. We were going to grant them a free review. Do you remember that, Jay? Do you remember that particular contest? Yeah. Sure. So, Jay, what I did was I flipped a coin because we had two people. I flipped a coin in the air. I caught it. And I had designated heads for one person and tails for the other person. Jay, do you want to know who our winner is? Who's the coin flipped over for positively?
Me?
No.
Oh, well, I don't care.
The winner of you were not eligible, by the way, but I do appreciate your feedback. The winner of our December 2013 iTunes feedback is Mr. Scott Russell Helgrim, who has chimed in with many of opinion and some suggestions in the past. He gets a free one. So, Mr. Helgrim, when you hear this episode, you are going to be able to select an album for us to review free of charge. So, feel free to email that over to us, and we'll review it. It's that simple. There you go.
Easy peasy.
Contest over. That's it, Jay. We're out of here. We'll be back next week, probably. No, likely. With another episode of Dig Me Out.
Join the conversation about this episode at digmeoutpodcast.com, where you can find links to our Facebook page and Twitter feed, as well as links to our Request a Review and merchandise pages.